God put a word, a direction, a sense of urgency in my heart. He's taken us on a study that we call the study of the covenants of God. There's something inside us that he's trying to take us in this day and hour to try to come to grips and come to a firm resolve of how we stand in line with that call. And then that question, I heard the psalmist pose a profound question that I feel our generation must respond to. In Psalms 11:3, he put forth the powerful statement. He says, the question comes in this way, and it says this: if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? This word foundations that we're looking at here, in Hebrew it's the word SHOFAR. But what it speaks in terms of those things on which society rests. It speaks of the moral, the character, or the integrity by which a social order is sustained. In other words, he says, he's not talking about just the foundation of the house. He says, if the foundations be destroyed, if the moral character, if the integrity and the personal worth of a society is destroyed, what will the righteous do? That's what he says. As the psalmist putting forth, and I feel that's a question that truly we, as this generation, is going to have to respond to. Because I've seen, there was a statistic. How many guys went to the movie to see The Four Blood Moons? We had a great turnout, a great turnout. But it's a good movie. But in the movie, there's a statement that was made that kind of shook me. You know what I said? The statement was this. It says, we live in the most Bible illiterate generation since our country was ever founded. This time is upon us right now with all the things that's taking place. He says, this generation, the time we live right now, all the people who call themselves Christians and all the people, all the Bibles and all the proliferation of all the paraphernalia of religiosity, he says, we're living in a generation of the most Bible illiterate generation since this country was founded. That's dangerous. That's why it says, if the foundations be destroyed, if the moral character, if the firm foundation that establishes this country, establishes us as a people, be eroded away, and we don't even know where it's at, what will the righteous do? And then that's when God echoed my spirit. He said, that's the purpose for this study. The purpose for a study, why God will have me to teach as I am on the covenants of God. God says, the purpose of this study is to shore up the breach within the foundations. Shore up the breaches within our foundations. The title of tonight's study is The God of Order. That's where we left off. We left off with a study in which I was speaking in terms of the God of order. And we laid down in response to the questions during our last study, we laid down the 7 covenants of God. Just build off where we left off. There's a subtitle to where I'm going. And that subtitle is called The Layering Effect. With that in play, you can prepare your hearts. Turn with me to the book of Ecclesiastes. I'm just going to touch on this, a very popular passage. A book of Ecclesiastes, written by an incredible man, Shlomo. Solomon. It's incredible man that God had birthed on the earth during his season. See, he was the third king of Israel. It's incredible. When they very first established the kingdom, we had Saul, then we had David. Shlomo, or Solomon, was the third kingdom. He was the legitimate son of David and Bathsheba. His name, Solomon, means peaceful, because God brought him into a time of peace. But his surrogate father, the one that raised him and nurtured him, Nathan, he called him Jedediah. That word Jedediah means beloved of Yahweh. He is beloved of Yahweh. This man Solomon's an incredible man, for God gave him extreme wisdom. Shlomo had a mind that was closest to Adam on earth at his time, the wisest man on earth. So I just want to go to the book of Ecclesiastes. The 3rd chapter. And it reads as such. I'm reading verses 1 through 8, and I'm going to jump down to 11. But listen to it. It says, For everything there is a season. There's a right time for every intention under heaven. There's a time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. There's a time to kill and a time to heal. There's a time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. There's a time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to throw stones and a time to gather stones. There's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. There's a time to search and a time to give up. There's a time to keep and a time to discard. He speaks of a time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. Verse 11 says, He has made everything suited to its time. He has made everything suited to its time. And He's placed human beings in an awesome awareness of eternity itself. Solomon, this wise man, as he was speaking, he was trying to capture what God's mind is. As he brought everything down to earth, you can almost summarize everything that he said quickly when he says this. He says, to everything, there's a season. There's a time for everything. Or in other words, there's an order. God's just not allowing things to come slip slide, but there's a time for everything, or specifically, there's an order. Rabbi Shaul said it this way. Rabbi Paul said it this way, and this is what we discussed during our last study. When he spoke to the church in Corinth, he says, let all things be done decently and in order. that all things be done decently and in order. As we conclude our last study, there's two key principles that we established. The first one was that he is a God of order. And the second principle that we came from there was that he doesn't change. He's a God of order, and he doesn't change. That makes me think about that the story about the elderly couple in the car. I don't know if I ever shared that with you. Some of you guys might have heard it, so get ready for a repeat. There's an elderly couple that was driving down the street in the car. And as they always do, the older guy sitting there right behind the wheel, and he just tooting like this, just driving down the street. And his wife is in the front seat with him, but she's over as far as she can against the door, almost pushing the window out, And as they're driving down the street, they pull up behind a couple of lovebirds. And they were as close as they could be in the car. You know how you get. She's almost sitting on his lap while he's driving. And so they kind of pull up behind him. And he just, guy is still driving like this. And the wife looks over and she looks at the car and sees the lovebirds. She looks at him driving. Looks back at her. Looks back at him. Looks back at her. And she says to him, "Why don't we ever do that anymore? Drive like that." And the old man is sitting driving like this, holding the steering wheel, and he looks down and says, "I haven't moved. I haven't moved." That perception, I remember my uncle told me this years ago. He says, I remember seeing that. He said, you see some lovebirds going down the street, look like one big head in the car. They sit so close. And that's what he says, when God says, he hasn't changed. We changed. We have been conditioned to think illogically in the midst of this. It's kind of like that frog in the beaker mindset. Something's happened. To be biblically illiterate, something's transpired inside the people, inside our minds. We have been conditioned to think illogically. It's like that little frog in the beaker, where it sits there and you kind of turn the heat up. We all know the little experiment. And the water slowly gets warmer and warmer. As he sits there, he's unaware of the change because it's so gradual, to the point where the water gets to the point, it gets so hot and it kills him. But instead of being suddenly where he would have been aware to jump up out of the water, he had all the ability to do that. But it was so slow, so subtle, it just kept on cranking up, that as he sits there to his own demise, because the change in the temperature is too subtle to recognize. The breach in the foundation, in our foundation, and then said, if the foundations be destroyed, what will the righteous do? The breach in the foundation has been very subtle in progression. It's something that you don't see right away. But you're sitting here, and to the point when someone makes a comment like that, you stop and think like, where do we make the turn? What happened? Or when does it suddenly change? Or what? Slowly but slowly. And see, when it happens, it results in a mindset that takes us out of plumb, and we don't even know it. For example, we have been conditioned to think illogically. We are called, if you look at it, it says we are called kings and rulers, and said to have dominion of this earth. Now, if that could be true, where do we find this truth? In Genesis. Where do you find this truth in Genesis? Now, but if that's correct, and Genesis is the first book of the law, and we are no longer under the law, because that's Old Testament stuff. How do we claim this truth? We can't. We can't. Why? Because just like the story, God doesn't change. We change. So we proclaim one thing, but it's illogical and don't make sense if you follow the progression of what you just said. So somehow, some way, the heat's been turned up, but we don't even know where it changed and how we came to the mindset that we have. See, we can't pick and choose in God's covenants. God's covenants are not a buffet line. You can't walk down through it and says, okay, I'll take Abraham. I don't like Moses. I'll take grace. I'll take renewed. Ooh, David sounds good. I like to wear a crown, but I don't want to deal with that thing with that Noah. I don't want no flood, stuff like that. I think I'll just take these. And then you're going to take and walk away talking about, I'm a covenant-keeping Christian. No, something happens. Something logically in our minds change. And God's trying to say, if the foundations are removed or destroyed, what are you going to do? If your basis and your mindset's out of plumb, what transpires? For example, the strategy of the beaker being turned very slow is very subtle. Because the strategy is to change the names of things to dilute the effect. For example, it's easy for me to embrace the terminology, the Lord's Supper, which I'll never find in Scripture, instead of calling it the Seder, which is the original term found in text. So I will embrace the Lord's Supper or the Last Supper, but if you ask me about the Seder, I'm saying, what is that? Something's changed, something's diluted, your minds are getting shifted, getting you ready for the next piece. It's easy for us to look and say, here comes Pentecost. As opposed to its true name, a Shabbat. You know why? It's easy for me to look at the number 50 than to look at God's Moed. So I can count the 50 days, and because of a theological translation to get me to focus on the 50 instead of saying Shabbat, well, okay, I count the days, but I miss the key point and understand that I must keep God's Moed. So if I say Shabbat, it makes me ask, what is that? I won't say that. We won't deal with that because it's easier just to stick with the numbers. Or, here's a good one. I just heard a new one the other day for, why they changed this. It's no longer called replacement theology. See, because, people say, we don't call it that because originally that was very embraced. If you had the people replacing the Israelites or the Jews or the God's covenant people in Scripture, because of the cross, there's this whole mindset that said replacement theology. Well, now since that has a little negative stigma to it, then let's change it. We'll call it fulfillment theology. That's what I did. I said, well, where did that come from? But it's a change the names, dilute the effect, turn up the beaker, and you end up out so far out plumb that you don't even know when it began and where. In Job, chapters 38 to 41, I'm going to go there. Chapter 38. Eob or Job. chapters 38 to 41 is an incredible passage because in that passage, God declares his foundational sovereignty. I read it, I sometimes stand there with my mouth open because I start seeing where this man, Job, comes up and he starts to question, and God gives a litany. I'm not going to read the whole book. I'm just going to read this portion of it. So it says in verse 4, I'm not going to talk about the reprimand he gave Job before he started talking. We'll just drop down to the question. I think it's incredible. When he looks and says, where were you when I founded the earth? Tell me if you know so much. Do you know who determined its dimensions? Or who stretched the measuring line across it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Who shut the sea behind closed doors? Wow. Could you imagine somebody ask you a question like that? He says, who shut the sea behind closed doors? And when it gushed forth from the womb, when I made the clouds its blanket and dense fog its swaddling cloth, when I made the breakers its boundaries and set its gates and bars in place. And I told the ocean itself, you may come this far, but no further. Here your proud ways must stop. God goes on with profound questions all throughout the 38th and 30th and 41th chapters. He declares his sovereignty. But even as he starts saying how it's all set in place, what does he say? Again, God declares his order of things. We find that God is a God of order. Profound statement. In Genesis 1, Genesis 1 does a profound thing. God's foundational design of divine order is displayed. And he reveals it, this principle. He develops this divine principle of order and a principle of layering. Now, I know I got some profound theologians and students of Scripture in the room. And so, if you guys have the patience, I want you just to bear with me. Because there's a principle that God's laid down in place that impacts all of his creation. It's an uncanny principle. So I want to reinforce this divine principle. The one dealing with that he's layering, that he is not a one-dimensional God. So I need you guys to kind of just go with me here. So it's this one thing to read it, but I really need you to come with me to see it as I'm going to just try to read this passage. And I tried to layer the thought, so you might kind of watch the monitors as they go through it, because I need you to, I'm just trying to get you to feel the effect of what I'm saying. I want us to go to Genesis. I want to read it this way. So come with me. It starts off with this. There's nothing wrong with the screen. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The earth was unformed and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the surface of the water. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So there was evening and morning, and one day. And God said, let there be a dome in the middle of the sky. In the middle of the water. And let it divide the water from water. And God made the dome, and it divided the water from under the dome, from the water above the dome. And that is how it was. And God called the dome sky. So there was evening and there was morning, a second day. And God said, let the water under the sky be gathered together in one place, and let dry land appear. And that is how it was. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the water he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth put forth grass and seed-producing plants and trees, each yielding its own kind of seed, bearing fruit on the earth. And that is how it was. The earth brought forth grass and plants, each yielding its own kind of seed, and trees, and each producing its own kind of seed bearing fruit. And God saw that it was good. So there was evening and morning, a third day. And God said, let there be lights in the dome of the sky to divide the day from the night. And let them be for signs and seasons and days and years. And let them be for lights in the dome and the sky to give light to the earth. And that is how it was. And God made two great lights, the larger light to rule the day and the smaller light to rule the night, and the stars. And God put them in the dome of the sky to give light to the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And so there was evening and morning, a fourth day. And God says, let the water swarm with living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth. And in the open dome of the sky, God created the great sea creatures and every living thing that creeps, so that the water swarmed with all kinds of them. And there was every kind of winged bird, and God saw that it was good. Then God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters of the sea, and let birds multiply on the earth. And so there was evening and morning, a fifth day. And then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures, each kind of livestock, crawling animals and wild beasts. And that is how it was. And God made each kind of wild beast, each kind of livestock, and every kind of animal that crawls around the ground. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in the likeness of ourselves, and let them rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the air, the animals and all over the earth, and over every crawling creature that crawls on earth. And so God created humankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the air, and every living creature that crawls on earth. Then God said, throughout the whole earth, I am giving you as food for every seed-bearing plant and every tree with seed-bearing fruit, And to every wild animal, the bird in the air, and the crawling creatures crawling on the earth, in which there is a living soul, I'm giving this food of every kind of green plant. And that's how it was. And God saw everything that he had made. And indeed, it was very good. So there was evening and morning, a sixth day. Thus the heavens and earth were finished, along with everything in them. And on the seventh day, God finished with his work that he had made, so he rested the seventh day and set it apart and called it holy. God took everything, which we talk about, and we know this. But as he called forth earth, nothing moved. By the time man came, he didn't reach back and remove the light. He didn't reach underneath. And on the third day, and Torah says, I don't think I like or would say the fish. He kept doing this, which we talk about, this layering effect. And the depth of all that we see on earth is just profound. Because as he built up in the beginning, he keeps putting another piece on. And as the earth takes its fullness, all the activity below it still exists and subsists and takes care of itself through all God's ecological system, the way it's interacting with itself. So by the time he brings not only the fish and the wildlife and the plants, everything's still responding, but there's such a depth that as we see it, and the fullness thereof, as we experience it, it's not like I can walk out here, and it's so incredible because when I walk out here and I see all this grass and the trees and the birds, that's just all that I'm seeing from the surface. Because when I break the ground, there's a whole nother world, whole nother universe that's going on all below the ground, below the earth. Plant life and molecules and things that are living and breathing. The depth of it, as he spoke things into being, is a whole nother realm. I remember going to the ocean, and as I stood on the sand and the beach, I watched the sail ships on top of the water. I watched people, they're skylighting and stuff, and I'm just watching all the activity above. But once I put on my little snorkel outfit and I walked in, and I stepped underwater, I went under the sea, there's a whole nother world that I could not see was above. And the deeper I go, there's a whole nother universe. Scientists have found themselves, they could pick up the mud or stone, take it to the lab, pull it apart, and see all the microcosms, there's things going on, and they see a whole nother universe contained in the mud itself. Plant life and all the little atoms and things that's transpiring in the mud, in the dirt. Under the microscope, they see another whole world of a universe taking place. God's layering effect is so incredible as it moves up bigger and bigger and bigger. But the principle is the same. The same principle is true with his covenants. See, as we see the Edenic covenant, as it comes in play, each of the covenants, as we go into our study, I said before, we'll start going to more depth of each of them. But I want you to understand the same principle that God used in bringing the earth into fruition, the same layering principle, he does it with his covenants. As he speaks in terms of the Edenic covenant, where it's God's promise in creation. And he lays over top the Adamic covenant, God's promise and his protection. Again, we'll step inside to understand more. And the Noahic, same principle on earth. He keeps laying the benefits and the principles, the things he lays down with each of them, he's layering the next one over top. The promises that he gave to, they spoke in Eden before the fall were not removed. When he put forth his covenant of preservation, when Adam stepped from the garden after the fall, the Edenic promises are still in place, but now he overlays them with the Adamic promises. Gives a deeper depth, even to the point when it comes to the Noahic promise, the promise of preservation. He gives a very visible sign when he starts speaking in terms of the rainbow. Visible sign, but there's much more depth that's associated with it. Even to the point when it comes to us and we start speaking to us about the Abrahamic covenant. Lays it over top of the ones underneath. Again, each of the covenants are in their very specific order. We can't skip over them. Each of them holding profound truths that support the one above. Each has its own very distinct characteristics and their signs. Each of them supporting the one above it. So by the time he moves with Abraham with the promise and redemption, he's setting him up for the next one that comes with a Mosaic promise and the instructions to govern earth and to walk finally upon it. Even as he sets up the Davidic covenant, when he starts talking about his promise or his covenant and his kingdom. Each of them. So by the time he hits us with the renewed, where he goes back to restore Adam, there's God's promise and restoration. The bigness is in it. It's that he sees way beyond what we're looking at today with all of our silo mentality, our ethnic thinking, our prejudicial thoughts. When God goes back and what he sees in the renewed is not fractured, but the one new man. He sees the Adam being restored from where he began. One thing we'll find out as we go through and conclude our studies is that we're going to see that the covenants themselves, the 7 covenants, they fall in 2 separate groupings, 2 categories. The first 3 are universal covenants. That's what we see in the book of Acts, kind of being displayed. Over in Acts 15, 19 through 21, you see when Paul was out speaking to, when he went to speak to the churches and the Judaizers come down and they went to challenge them. But the thought that came into being was that there's from the Edenic covenant all the way to the Abrahamic covenant, there's a basic foundation that God has put in place for man to rule on earth. We call those universal covenants. The latter 4 are called to the nation. In it, we will, as we go through our study and we continue to pull out the meat of what God is saying, we'll find, under the nation of the nation of Israel covenants, that's where David stood firm. When we try and ask the question, it says, why did David say what he said when he stood there and looked at Goliath? He says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine who dare challenge the armies of the living God? What do you mean uncircumcised? Evidently, he must be setting something else that he's using as the basis of foundation he's speaking from. Because he knows when God took him into the promised land, when God told them that there will be giants in the land and what he was going to do with them giants. He told them as he brought them into the land as to where they would be and what they would do. It's that same covenant that's there is why Joshua took the children of Israel before they crossed over the Jordan to step into Jericho. Look at it. what did he do? He brought them back into covenant one more time. Because he said what? All the ones who had stepped out of Egypt had died in the wilderness. This whole group hadn't yet all entered in to embrace the sign. So when they went to step into the promised land to face all the demonic forces of that era, first thing he had them do was get back in line with covenant. And as they came in line with covenant, see, now they can walk as they went to walk behind that ark. And they went to pick up those shofars, and they went to speak. See, you had a whole new allegiance of men operating under the obedience of God's covenant grace that stood outside the walls of Jericho. That's where you can find someone like a Rahab, where she's seen them as they came in. When that water stood up and these people came over, these two spies come in at night. They come into her place. And the thought comes in question, there's a lot of people that live in Jericho. How does she know those guys weren't from there? There's something about a way a covenant person or the aurora about you is going to differentiate you between light and darkness. And when they walked in, she seen something that was powerful enough to take and store them away to hide them. And then that's when they came looking for them, she had told them they had gone a different way. I love her response. They said that when she went up onto the roof to talk to them, she pulled back the flax and seeing those two men sitting there. And she says, your God is God of heaven and the God of earth. We've heard and we've seen all the workings before you even came in here. We heard about what you did to Mithraim, what your God did to the greatest nation on earth that ruled everything. He made it look like a war field. And those two kings that gave us fits, Sihon and Og, he says, we heard about what your God did to them. And she said, we heard about the big rock that rolled behind you that was giving you water. And manna falling from the air, feeding you. We've seen as you guys were walking, you guys are coming out of the wilderness after 40 years and your clothes aren't even wearing out. And she says, and then on top of that, of all times, you chose to come and look at us during the flood season. Our king and all the people figured we had some time to build up armaments to fight against you guys because the river was so flooded. No one knew that the Jordan was going to stand up and back up wide enough for you guys to come through and walk on dry ground. We're on top of the walls. This is the only thing we seen was the dust moving. So they're trying to think, oh my gosh. Well, she says, if the king don't get it, I love the story. It says, when they walked up to Jericho, it was all shut up. So they thought. God don't need doors. I'll lay the walls down so you guys can walk in. So they're looking for battering rams. They're looking for catapults. They're trying to figure out how these guys, if they don't cut down any trees, how these guys can get in our walls. Our walls are thick enough you can ride chariots around. But no one knew that the chariots are going to lay down and you're going to walk across 235 all by yourself. That piece froze them. And then they had to even take it one more notch, because when they cut covenant with her, she says, all I ask is I know that God has already given you the city, that you will just spare me and my family. Yes. And he said, you just put the scarlet cord out, similar to like when we place blood above the door, you drop some red outside your window. And when that window thing comes down, when the walls laid down, her house is still intact because her family all beside there. God knew how to lay everything down and without harming her. Covenant. Each piece, everyone. When David spoke, he spoke not from one tier, not from one level. He had a whole depth of promises all over him. So by the time he comes walking in, by the time Joshua comes walking in, he's got everything that God spoke and enlightened their minds from Eden to Abraham to Moses. God is a God that builds. He has a layering effect, a principle, that he is a God of depth and he's a God of order. He's a God that doesn't change. He's the same God yesterday, today, and forevermore. And that same God, that same God that rose Yeshua up from the grave, that he said his body will not see decay. That same God, that same power. When my appendix ruptured and every medical doctor had every reason why I shouldn't get off that bed. They could tell me according to law, to facts, why I should be dead. They said my appendix ruptured on Sunday. You shouldn't have been here Monday. You shouldn't have been here Tuesday. You shouldn't be here. What do you mean you went to work on Thursday? And then you start feeling it on Thursday? By the time they went to me, they said, you're so hard, you shouldn't be able to. They know if I could even get off the bed, get off the gurney, what have you. But see, the doctors were speaking death. Pilate and every religious leader who thought they crucified Jesus, they thought they were seeing death. No one's seen him get back up and come walking through the room talking about shalom. Here comes the renewed covenant stepping through the door. Turn around talking about, put your hand on my side, touch me, and see if I'm not lying. Do you guys think he's seeing spooks? You got any bread? Ghosts don't drink liquid. They said, Matthew, you should be dead. When I got up off that bed and walking out of there, I had my major doctor, the one who didn't think I would even get up, back up the wall and says, that's a different man. It's not the same guy. It's the same guy, same God. Same God, same God. Same results. He had the first thing to say about my life. He's going to have the last thing to say about my life. He called me in for a purpose, and I'm going to fulfill. I wasn't done yet. He set me there before you as a sign to let you know that I am God all by myself. They had tubes going to me from everywhere. God started pulling tubes out. He says, why? Just like Gideon. You guys aren't going to get any glory. He don't need your medicine. He don't need this. He don't need that. That's why I'm telling Nita, well, if he doesn't have the tubes, it doesn't pump, he's going to get nausea. That's why they come back inside my room. Are you sick? Do you feel like vomiting? I'm thinking, no, I'm looking for something to drink. I'm ready to go. It don't make sense. It don't make sense. But I serve a God of eternity. The same God that looked at me when I was laying in that bed because he had a bigger work than he told me, he says, which report are you going to believe? That kind of God. I can change it. I am a covenant-keeping God. I am a covenant-keeping child of the King. He doesn't change. He's a God of order, and he's not messy. He wants us to walk according to his covenant, to his plans. He's given us instruction. People try and say, well, under all that law. Why would the manufacturer give you a book and tell you how to live on earth? He tell you what to eat, what don't eat, tell you how to wipe up, tell you how to clean, tell you he'll give you the Torah, he tells you about the stars, he tells you how the whole system's made up. And he says, if you walk this way, I come that you may have life and have it fuller. Without it, the enemy is just going to give you a rouge. You're making stuff up and you're living in a lie. But the God of truth came there and laid down on there and started giving them all the instructions and tell them how to walk as kings and priests and rulers of earth. He says, I'm the God who can look at the sea and say, it's only going to come this far and no further. He said, I'm the same God as long as you guys have lived in Iowa, all the winters you guys gone through, I'm the God who made every snowflake and not one of them the same. I'm the God that says if you can't look at a snowflake, just to give you an idea, look at the heavens. I know every star by name. They got the, what is that, the Hubble, going out trying to find, it said the further it goes out, the more universes it sees. It said it keeps on going out, and it said it blowing the scientist's mind. It said because they can't see no end to it. And God says, I know everyone by name. I put them all out there myself. Which one says, oh my God. That one says, I am the God. God of covenant. And if I know every star by name, when Yeshua stands on the earth, he tries and says, look at the sparrows. If God knows every star and every snowflake, he knows every bird and every worm, he knows every ant and every molecule, you're worth more than these in his eyes. He says, what is man that God is so mindful of him? He said, I shaped you in my image. If I can keep my eyes on the stars and look at the earth below, I can see the sea, how deep. But I know when you're laying down tonight and I can take care of your stomach, I can take care of your thoughts, I can heal your body. I know you. I made you. You were fearfully and wonderfully made when I stuck you in your mom's womb. Cal, he says, when I shaped you and stuck you in your mother's womb, I took the template. There's not another one like you. I destroyed the template. You're the one and only. William couldn't do what you had to do because I got a call for William by himself. That's nothing to do with Cal. Amelia, he says, has a call and fingerprints just for her. He says, I'm the same type of God who could take Anita and I, bring us together. Why? I need Melissa. I knew the molecules, I knew the blend, I knew what she looked like, I knew the song she sang, I knew everything about her before we even said, I do. God says, she is fearfully and wondrously made. And all that, it's that God who tries says, I'm the God that speaks Edenic, I'm the God that speaks Adamic, I'm the God who speaks Noahic, Mosaic, Abrahamic. That's okay. God says he's a cross-hand blessing. But you get my drift. It is impactful. God says if the foundations are removed, if we let our broken mindset shift our thinking, that we become so biblically illiterate that we look to erase the foundational issues of God's moeds, his covenant times, his promises, his words. He says, remove those. What is the righteous going to do? We'll find ourselves speaking like Peter. Where should we go, Lord? For you have the words of life. Where should we go? God, don't allow my foundations to be removed. God, give me wisdom to shore up any breach, any of these thoughts about this demonic thoughts about trying to dilute the strength that you gave me on earth. Father, you've done too much to bring me to this point. Show me your word. Embrace me in your covenant grace. Wrap me that I may walk effectively on earth according to your will. Amen.